Retirement Bet Time 2022 edition. I will be analyzing every single storm, and giving them a percent chance of retirement. Why are we analyzing every single storm when we know some storms have no chance of being retired? Just to say I put it out there. So Tropical Storm Alex, I would actually give 0.5% chance of being retired. I know that sounds crazy. It only caused 4 deaths and the damage was 100,000, but keep 2 things in mind. First of all, AON's damage report did not attribute damage that was clearly Alex to Alex, so all we have is NCDC data, which tends to undercut the damage. Now, the TCR mentions only minimal damage. We referenced the 104,000, but if the TCR does mention the 300 million, that would up its damage total. But the impacts weren't really that significant. I don't see Cuba or Florida requesting a retirement for the name, given how did really only minimal damage, and I don't think it would have been that notable had it not been a tropical storm, because those storms always get the attention because they're tropical. If a storm isn't a tropical storm, it's a lot harder for the storms to gain notability, and I will actually be making a video discussing why there's more Wikipedia articles for like tropical storms and whatnot than these other types of storms, because you will see that a lot, and I will make a video discussing this because it's not a coincidence. This is planned. So after that, we have Tropical Storm Bonnie. Hurricane Bonnie, when you include the Eastern Pacific portions, in total the storm killed 5 people, 1 of which in the Eastern Pacific. The other 4 were in the Atlantic before landfall. Bonnie became the first storm in 6 years since Otto to make a crossover, but it was less destructive than Otto. I can't remember people saying that Earl had a better likelihood of being retired than Otto in 2016, but what wound up happening was Otto was retired and Earl was not, which I think surprised a lot of people. That would be kind of like if the Republicans won the Senate, but at the same time Democrats won the House. On its own, there's a 30% chance of each situation happening, but both happening would come as a surprise to everyone, because when you think about it, if it goes Republican enough to be a Republican Senate, for sure you'd think we have a Republican House. And if we go far enough left to have a Democratic House, you'd for sure think that we would have a Democratic Senate, thinking about how the polls go. But there's that very small chance that both could happen, although I do see more of it being a split Congress in the side of a Republican House and a Democratic Congress, similar to what we had after the 2010 elections. Just with different numbers, of course. So that's Bonnie's story. I don't think it'll be retired. Damage is currently minimal. We don't really have estimates. It was for sure less destructive than Grace, and if Grace wasn't retired, then Bonnie definitely won't either. And Colin only caused 1 death due to rip currents, and we don't even know how much impact it occurred in North Carolina. A Wikipedia article is expressly refuted for this reason. Hence I don't think it'll be retired. We actually really have a lot of these EPAC storms this year not getting articles. It's only Agatha and Blas. And even a lot of these storms got a lot of notability. But what it really was preparations weren't significant, and this information simply could not be dug up. I think the closest to an article one of them managed to get was Kay, but even Kay did not get an article, because even when Southern California impacts were factored in, it wasn't enough, and there isn't really any information on any impacts from Arizona or Nevada, despite having impacts there. So there's definitely been a lack of information. This was actually discussed how that was the case in 2021 as well, but in 2021 it was certainly easier to find the information than in 2022. But in the Atlantic, we've also had this thing, and then of course the Atlantic went quiet. Now, considering that Danielle was a total fish storm, that wound up causing no deaths or damage. It's really 0%, so is Colin. Bonnie, I'd give 0.5% just to get in that very unlikely chance that someone deems it destructive enough, because it did cause some fatalities that weren't rip current fatalities. Earl caused 2 deaths, but again, not that much damage. And those 2 deaths were due to a lightning strike in Puerto Rico. A single lightning strike caused 2 deaths. Also denied a Wikipedia article because, again, of this lack of information surrounding Earl. And pretty much nobody remembers Earl's impacts in Puerto Rico because of Fiona. Fiona's chance of retirement I would give as 55%. Take this with a grain of salt. I am not saying that Fiona will be retired. 55% is a toss-up. I want to stress that again. 55% is a toss-up. That means I'm saying it is slightly more likely. In an election, if somebody wins with 55% of the vote, then that vote is a pretty clear victory. But if someone only has a 55% chance of victory, that is different. They're probably going to win the election with 50.5% of the vote. So, again, I want to stress this again. 55% is a toss-up. It's too close to make a call either way, but I would slightly tilt in favor of Fiona getting its name retired. Fiona caused $2.68 billion in damage and has made the NOAA Billions list, but we don't know how much damage has been caused yet from Fiona. Fiona caused 31 deaths, of which more than 21 Puerto Rico, where it caused $2 billion in damage, with $375 million in other portions of the Caribbean, where God knows how many deaths were there, I didn't check. Canada saw 3 deaths and $300 million in damage as an extratropical cyclone with the deepest pressure. So, I would definitely say that Fiona would have a chance of retirement for both Puerto Rico, but I would honestly say it might be due to Canada as well, or more so due to Canada, because the U.S. has recently been neglecting tropical storms and requesting them for retirement, and I don't know if this would have made the cut if it was on the mainland. I don't think it would have, given how Isaias was not retired. If any of you remember that storm, I certainly do. I still remember that storm. Given how Isaias wasn't retired, for some reason I can't picture Fiona being retiring based on its Puerto Rico impacts alone. But given how storms like Juan and Igor were retired in Canada, I do think that Fiona has that better chance of being retired despite being extratropical at landfall. Yeah. Now, Gaston just remained out in the open Atlantic. Again, pretty much 0% chance of being retired. Didn't really harm anyone. And for a while, I thought Hermine was that way too. For a while, I thought that Hermine would be the same. And Hermine very easily could be the same because all of its damage and deaths are tangible. Well, maybe not the $9.8 million in damage, but the 33 deaths due to a boat sinking is tangible. I think that it was from Hermine and the sources describe it as such relating to Hermine, but it could be deemed in the TCR that it was, as a matter of fact, not Hermine. This is something that has to be seen. We have seen these kinds of tangible events be cut out in the TCR. Look at what happened with Ophelia. We had first thought it caused 54 deaths, and then it caused 5. Because the TCR said that Ophelia was not responsible for the Iberian wildfires that were occurring at the same time that seemingly people thought could be related to Ophelia. I'm not exactly sure how people think it was related to Ophelia, but people did think that it was related to Ophelia. But that was shot down in the TCR, which again cut out 49 deaths. Ophelia wasn't retired despite being thought to have caused 54 deaths when they decide on which names to be retired, and maybe they cut back down to 5. And I'm not sure how Europe can request storms to be retired, which would also be a problem for these storms in Africa. Because if Europe can't request a storm of time, which I don't know if the WMO would let them, I have to look at the rules for that, and I think I checked once and I couldn't find anything definitive. But if Europe can't request a time of the storms, then Hermine might be allowed to live, because I don't know if Western Africa would be allowed to as well. In the 33 deaths due to a ship sinking, this was like Joaquin. Joaquin did get retired due to sinking a ship, but it caused more damage at $200 million. It sunk an American ship, the SSL Pharaoh, while not too far from the U.S. It sunk in Atlantic time, which was at the time the same time as New York. The ship went down at about 11:40 UTC, which is about 7:40 local time, and it was also 7:40 a.m. in New York on that fateful day, although not really fateful for New York. So that's Hermine, and I think that Hermine is just on this kind of borderline stuff. I would personally put Hermine's chance of retirement at 40%, which is kind of at the low end for a toss-up. I'd say a toss-up goes from about 40 to 60%, just because even though, it's close, but once you get to someone having only a 40% chance of winning an election, if it's only a two-person election, I might not call it a toss-up at that point. I might say that it does lean in favor of the other candidate at that point. So 40% is complicated, but I would personally say that no. Hermine, while it's still kind of in toss-up territory, it's not really that deep into it. But what is probably going to get retired, as a matter of fact, they give a 99.95% chance of being retired, is Hurricane Ian. Its death toll seems to have stabilized at 137 deaths, but the death toll has started out with an estimate of 50.2 billion and is only set to go up. Also, in case you're wondering, the preliminary estimate by NOAA has actually been given 3 sig figs, not 1 like you might expect. And we'll make a video about sig figs because they're actually pretty important. Pretty much a sig fig is that when you want to multiply numbers, you have to then round it to the least amount of significant figures that you have when you need to do math with numbers and science stuff, to avoid giving too much of a false sense of precision. And sig figs are important. When you buy thermometers, sig figs do cost you money. So, sig figs are important, but I didn't mean to talk about sig figs. Ian, in any case, caused quite a few deaths in Cuba, sunk a migrant ship that killed, I believe, 7 people. Then caused over 100 deaths in Florida and about 5 in North Carolina and 1 in Virginia. It caused enough deaths to make Ian the deadliest hurricane in U.S. history since that fateful Hurricane Katrina back in 2005, which would make it deadlier than storms like Rita and Ike and Harvey and Irma. Deadliest storm since Hurricane Katrina 17 years prior. And again, with that extreme damage total, I could see that damage pretty easily going up into the 60s and 70s of billions of dollars. So the damage over Ian is to be determined, but it's definitely going to be at least 50 billion, which would definitely be enough to make it be retired. Now, Julia is a bit of an interesting storm. The damage so far is not yet known, and despite only being a Category 1 storm, we saw the storm cause 78 deaths. Now, unlike Ida, I don't think this will be a question of whether or not the Venezuela deaths were related to the storm, because in this case, the storm tracked over Venezuela as a tropical depression, not simply as the remnants. So maybe it's a potential tropical cyclone, but everyone knew that the storm when it formed would be Julia, unlike Ida, where the 20 Venezuela deaths were actually briefly brought into question because nobody knew where the storm was in relation to Venezuela. Because again, Ida wasn't really that significant or even discussed about until it moved closer to Cuba. Which is also why when a precursor causes impacts and it's not a PTC, it's often hard to garner the impacts. Speaking of PTCs, we actually had a PTC in the Atlantic, but it didn't have any notability. As a matter of fact, I couldn't even find a single sentence on the impacts of potential tropical cyclone 4, just probably to show you how insignificant of a storm PTC 4 really was. In any case, what happened with Julia was that we saw 37 deaths in Venezuela. Now, given how these storms that cause even hundreds of deaths in Venezuela don't get retired, like Brett of 1993, or storms of that nature that cause hundreds of deaths in Venezuela don't get retired. Again, I don't know if a South American country can necessarily request the retirement of an Atlantic storm. And I don't know if Venezuela would. Well, it caused about 40 other deaths in Central America, bringing the total up to 75, I believe. I have seen similar storms, or I've heard about similar storms not getting retired. Think of Gert of 1993, or Matthew of 2010 is a good example. Obviously, Matthew would be retired in 2016 and will be replaced with something else. I forgot what it is, if it even comes down to, I think, Martin in 2023. But again, that's only if we get down to the M names, which for some reason I think I'm starting to doubt we're going to get down that far. We do have Carl right now, but as far as Julia's chances of retirement, based on the history, but also on the impacts and how someone like Iota were retired, I mean, this kind of falls like on the border of whether or not we retire or not. I would say it personally depends on what the damage is, which isn't out yet. I would personally give Julia a 70% chance based on the information we have now. This could go up or down as more information is released, but I would give it, again, 70% because, also a good example of a storm that wasn't retired. I have seen storms like this at this intensity get retired, but storms of this intensity also have not been retired due to their impacts, and it's going to be a bit hard to distinguish what the impacts were. So I think that Julia is something I would give a 70% chance of retirement for. Carl is budding, but I don't see it having too much of a chance of getting retired, given that it's only forecast to make landfall as a tropical storm. Again, we have to see how it goes, but with Carl's impacts, I don't foresee being retired. But Carl is a future storm, and we still have to see how these storms can go. I mean, like how these storms go in October is very variable. Right now, today is, oh damn it, all I have is a watch. All I can show you is the time. Hey, look everybody, it's like 2:06, nobody cares. But today is October 12th. Now, this was just 2 days after the fateful Hurricane Michael, so I can't include it in my example as much as I would like to. I also can't include Hurricane Nate, because again, Hurricane Nate rode up before this date in October. As far as storms after the state, 2019 saw 6 storms after the state. 6 storms. They were, starting at Melissa and going down to Sebastian, skipping Q, because we always skip Q. Now, the thing about 2019 storms, though, was that they were all weak. As a matter of fact, there's only one single memorable storm out of 2019, that being Hurricane Dorian, despite a bunch of storms forming. Hurricane Dorian was the only storm to get itself retired, even though Imelda and Lorenzo both had that chance. Now, 2020, after the state, we saw Delta, I believe, was on the state, actually. That's kind of funny. We had Zeta, Eta, and Iota. Now, Zeta and Delta didn't get retired, I guess because the death toll wasn't high enough despite causing high amounts of damage. But what was retired was Eta and Iota, which combined caused over 250 deaths and $9 billion in property damage. A lot of impact between Eta and Iota in Central America. Both were Category 4 storms in November. Now, Eta is classified as an October storm just because on October 31st, the tropical depression that formed Eta formed. Not even a tropical storm, but just a tropical depression. So Eta annoyingly counts as an October storm despite all the impact being in November. All of it. I think actually it was affecting the ABC Islands in October, but still. And then, of course, Eta made that weird path where Iota just crashed in Central America, failed to do what Bonnie and Julia could do, which was cross over into the Eastern Pacific. At first, we thought that Iota was the latest Category 5, but it was downgraded to Cat 4. And while Lenny was also a Cat 4 on the same date that Iota denigrated, it was a Cat 4 6 hours later in the day than Iota, so therefore no records were set by any 2020 storm whatsoever. As a matter of fact, 2020 even lacked a Cat 5 after this. I think Iota is always a great point to mention, both because, number one, initially it showed that Category 5 storms can occur very late into the season and why you always need to be careful, but also why just because a storm is given a rating before the TCR doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to hold through the TCR, as we saw with the downgrade of Iota. But that's all I have to say for right now about like this kind of topic about after October 12th, is that storms can form, though I'll admit it's usually rare and will probably, I don't know, given the current Atlantic information, I really don't think that we're going to see anything given how there's a bunch of wind shear. Honestly, Carl wasn't expected to form, but it formed off the remnants of Julia. But I don't, again, see something like this happening in 2022 again. And while November can have destructive storms, they have to be in just the right area. Like, you can't really have a destructive storm in the U.S. in November. It would have to be in Nicaragua or Point South. But again, you can't really have a storm make landfall in Point South because then you begin to get too close to the equator and you have a lack of this Coriolis stuff. But again, this is all for my very boring video. And I might make another one right now. I might not, depends on what my phone battery is. But thank you for watching.